Rancher saved a stranger in a blizzard. Not knowing she ruled the largest ranch in the territory, the blizzard came fast, like the world had decided to erase itself. On Kestrel's reach, storms were not just weather. They were a kind of living danger. The snow was sharp like ground glass, the wind carried static that could kill a radio, and the sky would turn the color of old metal. Calder Rook had seen storms that swallowed fences, storms that buried whole sheds, storms that made a strong man feel small. But this one had a mean edge to it, the kind that made even the herd beasts huddle tight and go quiet. Calder stood at the window of his main room and watched the white wall move across his land. The glass was old, scratched by years of grit. Outside, his fence posts were fading into the storm, one by one, until it looked like the world ended a few steps beyond his porch. He checked the house power board again. The geothermal heater was still running, thanks the deep, warm rock beneath the ground. The lights flickered, but they held. The comm screen on the wall was dead, filled with snow-like noise. The solar storm in the upper sky had started earlier that day, and it had dragged the blizzard behind it like a cloak. Calder rubbed his hands together, more from habit than cold. The house was warm, but the kind of cold outside could still get into a man's bones just by thinking about it. He had the storm shutters half closed. The roof vents were sealed. The animals were in the reinforced barn, packed close with heat lamps and feed blocks. Everything he could control, he had controlled. Then the old warning speaker on the wall cracked, as if it had remembered how to be alive. A harsh beep sounded, weak but clear enough to raise the hair on Calder's arms. He stepped closer. The speaker beeped again, and a thin voice followed, broken by static. Emergency, beacon, signal, local, proximity. Calder stared at it, not fully trusting his ears. The local emergency channel was not supposed to work during a storm like this. Most signals would be eaten by the charged air. But the speaker beeped again, and this time his home console spit out a set of numbers and a rough direction. Close. Too close. Calder's jaw tightened. People did not walk the plains in a blizzard unless they were desperate or foolish. And desperate people did not always stay kind. Out here, the territory syndicates liked to send inspectors who carried weapons and smiles that never reached their eyes. Sometimes they came as thieves. Sometimes they came with papers that said your land was no longer yours. Calder had learned to keep his distance from strangers, but an emergency beacon was different. It meant someone was dying. And even if Calder wanted to pretend he had not heard it, the sound would stay in his head like a nail. He moved to the storage locker beside the door. He pulled on his insulated coat, thick and heavy. He strapped on a utility belt with a cutter, a coil of smart rope, and a compact med patch kit. Then he hesitated, his hand hovering over the small shock baton mounted on the wall. He took it, not because he wanted trouble. Because on Kestrel's reach, trouble often found you anyway. Calder opened the side door that led into the wind buffer corridor. He sealed the inner door behind him. The corridor was a narrow tube that linked the house to the barn and the equipment shed. It was built to keep the worst of the storm out. The outer door had a window no bigger than his palm. He pressed his face close and saw nothing but white. He keyed the door panel and the outer seal hissed open. The storm hit him like a slap. Wind shoved snow into his coat seams and tried to pull the breath out of his mouth. He stepped forward, boots sinking into fresh drift. The yard lights were on, but the beams were weak, barely cutting into the white. He kept one hand on the corridor rail and moved slowly toward the shed. His small crawler sled sat inside, old and tough, with thick treads and a low frame. It was not pretty, but it could move through deep snow and broken ground better than anything with wheels. He climbed in, sealed the canopy, and started the engine. The sled hummed, steady and stubborn. The windshield wiper dragged ice across the glass, clearing a narrow strip. Calder plugged a cable into his wrist implant, connecting it to the sled's navigation unit. The coordinates from the beacon blinked on the tiny display. Distance, 1.1 kilometers. Direction, northwest toward the far fence line and beyond. Calder muttered under his breath. Of course. He guided the sled out of the shed and into the storm. The yard vanished almost at once. His house lights became dim stars behind him, then nothing. The world shrank to the sound of the engine and the small rectangle of sight ahead. The sled's headlamps showed snow going sideways, like the storm was trying to scrape the ground clean. Calder followed the coordinates, correcting his direction every few seconds. The compass was unreliable in this charged air, but the beacon's signal gave him a narrow path. He passed the barn where his herd beasts were safe. Their low shapes pressed against the reinforced walls, and the barn lights glowed faintly through the storm. He kept going. Beyond the barn, the land opened up into flat range with low scrub and shallow dips. Calder knew every meter of it, every hidden ditch and buried rock. Even so, the storm made it feel unfamiliar, like the plains were a stranger wearing his land as a mask. The beacon pinged stronger. Calder slowed the sled, peering ahead. The headlamps caught something dark and low, half buried. At first he thought it was a fallen fence post. Then he saw a flash of reflective material, a survival suit. His heart hit hard against his ribs. He stopped the sled and pushed the canopy open. Cold rushed in. He jumped down and the wind nearly knocked him over. He forced himself forward, leaning into it. His boots crunched through a drift that was already rising over his shins. The figure in the snow was a woman, curled on her side. Her suit was high-grade, better than anything most traveling workers wore. The outer layer was torn along one shoulder, and ice had formed around the edges like a crust. Her face shield was cracked. Beneath it, her eyes were closed. Calder knelt and pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck, finding a pulse. It was faint, but it was there. "Hey," he shouted into the wind, unsure she could hear. "Hey, can you hear me?" No response. He checked the beacon. It was clipped to her harness, blinking weakly, almost out of power. He saw a faint symbol on the suit's chest plate, a crest worn down by ice and grit. It wasn't a syndicate mark. That was a relief, but he didn't recognize it either. Calder's hands moved fast. He pulled a heat foil blanket from his belt, shook it out, and wrapped it around her torso. He slapped a med patch at the base of her neck, letting it inject warming fluids and stabilizers. The patch light turned green, then orange, then green again. She breathed in a shallow, shaky breath. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Calder leaned closer. "I'm getting you out of here." He tried to lift her, and his muscles protested. She was heavier than she looked, either from the suit's inner layers or from something hidden under it. But the storm was not going to give him time to wonder. He hooked the smart rope under her arms, secured it to his belt, and dragged her toward the sled in short, hard steps. The wind fought every movement as if it wanted to keep her. Snow whipped around them. Calder's face burned with cold. At the sled, he managed to lift her into the passenger bay, then climbed in beside her. He sealed the canopy and exhaled, shaking. The inside of the sled warmed slowly, but the air still felt sharp. The woman's head rolled slightly. Her eyelashes fluttered. Her eyes opened halfway, unfocused. Calder watched her closely. "Stay with me." Her lips moved. A whisper came out, so quiet he barely heard it. "Where?" "My place," Calder said. "You're safe. I found your beacon." She tried to speak again, but her throat seemed too dry. Her gaze shifted, catching the small knife on his belt, the shock baton near his thigh. Her eyes sharpened for a moment, alert despite the cold. Calder raised his empty hand. "I'm not here to hurt you." She blinked, then let her eyes close again, as if she had run out of strength. Calder turned the sled around and drove back the way he came. It felt like moving through a tunnel of white. The navigation display flickered, trying to keep its bearings. The storm pressed on the canopy like hands. Halfway back, a loud crack sounded in the distance. The sky flashed pale blue like silent lightning. The solar storm above was angry. For a second, Calder's implants buzzed in his wrist and the sled's engine stuttered. Calder cursed and adjusted the power feed to keep the system steady. He did not like this, not at all. The beacon had been close enough to find, which meant the woman had been on or near his land. That could be bad luck, or it could mean someone had been chasing her. Storms were good for hiding movements. They were also good for trapping people in the wrong place. Calder pulled into the yard and guided the sled into the corridor bay. He sealed the outer door, cutting off the storm's roar. Suddenly the air felt quiet, and Calder realized his ears had been ringing from the wind. He carefully unlatched the canopy and lifted the woman again, this time with less fight from the cold wind. Her suit was stiff with ice. She made a small sound, like a groan trapped behind her teeth. He carried her into the main room and laid her on the thick floor mat near the heater vent. The warm air hit the ice on her suit, and tiny droplets formed, rolling down in slow lines. Calder moved quickly. He peeled off her outer gloves and checked her fingers. Pale, but not blackened. Good. He released the cracked face shield and saw her face properly for the first time. She was younger than he had expected, maybe late 20s or early 30s. Her skin was cold pale, but her cheekbones were sharp and her brows were dark. A small cut ran along her temple. Her lips were cracked from cold, but there was something steady about the set of her jaw, even unconscious. Not a fragile traveler. Not someone used to being helpless. Calder fetched a warm water pack and carefully pressed it to her lips, letting a few drops seep in. Her throat moved as she swallowed. He felt a faint surge of relief. He moved to the kitchen unit and heated broth from a sealed pouch, the kind he kept for storm days. While it warmed, he checked the suit. The outer layers were expensive, with reinforced seams and a built-in environmental control system that had failed, likely damaged by the storm or the tear in the shoulder. The crest on the chest was clearer now, showing a stylized horizon line with 3 stars above it. The design looked official, like a brand, but not one he knew from syndicate shipping lanes. Calder frowned. Kestrel's Reach had big ranch coalitions, sure, powerful ones. They controlled herds, water rights, trade routes. Their people rode the plains in armored crawlers and carried their authority like a weapon. But those leaders stayed in their fortified estates. They did not end up half-frozen on the open range. He told himself not to guess. He had a stranger in his home, and that alone was risky enough. The woman stirred again, and this time she managed to open her eyes fully. They were a gray-green, sharp even through exhaustion. She looked at Calder, then at the ceiling, then at the heater vent, as if collecting pieces of the world. Calder held a spoonful of warm broth near her mouth. "Slow, you need heat and fluids." She hesitated, then sipped. Her throat worked carefully. Color returned to her lips a little. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse. Calder nodded, keeping his tone even. "Name?" Her eyes met his. There was a pause, just long enough to feel deliberate. "Myra," she said. Calder watched her closely. "Myra what?" Again that small pause. "Just Mara." He didn't press yet. A person half dead from cold didn't need interrogation, but he stored the detail away. "Where did you come from?" he asked. Myra's gaze slid away, not quite avoiding him, but not offering too much either. "I was traveling. I got separated." "From who?" She swallowed another sip. "My escort." Calder's fingers tightened slightly on the spoon. "And you ended up near my fence line in a storm that kills calms." Her expression did not change much, but her eyes sharpened. "I didn't plan it." Calder set the broth aside and sat back on his heels. "No one plans to freeze." Mara's breathing was still shallow, but steadier now. She adjusted slightly, wincing as the torn shoulder area shifted. Calder leaned closer to inspect the tear. "Your suit got ripped. That's why your heating failed. You got hit by something." She hesitated. "A fall, a piece of debris." Calder didn't like how clean that answer sounded, but he didn't call her out, not yet. He stood and pulled a repair tape roll from his supplies. "I'll patch the outer layer enough to keep heat in. The med patch is helping, but it won't last forever." Mara watched him work. Her eyes tracked his hands, his tools, the way he moved without wasted motion. Calder had fixed fences in storms and stitched wounds in the dark. When you lived alone, you learned to be your own doctor, mechanic, and guard. As he pressed the tape to the torn seam, Mara spoke again. "You live here alone?" Calder didn't look up. "Mostly." "Mostly," she repeated. "My animals," he said simply. Myra's lips twitched, almost a smile. "They keep you company." "They keep me fed," Calder replied. "Company is a bonus." Silence settled. Outside, the wind hammered the walls and the roof creaked. The heater vent hummed, steady like a heartbeat. Myra closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, her voice was quiet. "You didn't have to come for me." Calder finished the patch and sat back. "No," he said. "I didn't." Myra waited, as if expecting more. Calder looked at her, and for a second his guarded face softened. "But I did." Myra studied him, and something in her expression shifted. Not warmth exactly, more like recognition. Like she had expected most people to leave her to die, and she was adjusting to a different outcome. A sudden pop sounded from the comm console, and the screen flickered. Not a full signal, but a pulse. Calder turned his head sharply. The console emitted a weak scan tone, then died again, as if the storm had slapped it down. Calder stood and went to the window. The whiteout still ruled the yard, but in the far distance, beyond where the barn should have been visible, he thought he saw a dim glow moving through the storm. It was faint, like a cluster of lights trying to push forward. Convoy lights. His stomach tightened. No one drove a convoy in this kind of blizzard unless they had heavy machines and strong reason. Calder's land was not on the main route. If someone was out there, they were not simply passing by. Behind him, Myra shifted slightly. Calder didn't turn. He listened for her breathing for the smallest sign of panic or surprise. Myra's voice came low and steady. "What is it?" Calder kept his eyes on the storm. "Someone's coming." The lights grew clearer for a second, then vanished behind a wave of snow. Calder's mind ran through possibilities, each one worse than the last. He had saved a stranger, a good act, a human act, and now the storm had brought something else to his door, something that moved with purpose through a world that wanted everything to stop. Calder turned from the window and looked at Myra. "If those are the people you lost," he said, "you better tell me now." Myra's face was calm, but her eyes held a flicker of something sharp and hidden. She took a slow breath, as if deciding how much truth to spend. "They're not my escort," she said. Calder felt the cold crawl back into his chest, despite the heater. Outside, the distant lights pushed forward again, closer now, forcing their way through the blizzard like predators that could smell blood. Calder tightened his grip on the shock baton and stepped toward the corridor door. Whatever was coming, the storm wasn't going to stop it. The lights outside moved like slow stars trapped in the storm. Calder stood still for a moment, listening. The wind pressed against the walls, howling through the vents like something alive. The faint hum of the heater and the soft sound of Myra's breathing were the only calm things in the room. He turned away from the window and walked to the control panel near the door. His fingers moved over the old screen, bringing up the external sensors. Most of them were half-blind because of the charged air, but a few still worked. The thermal scan showed shapes in the distance. Big ones, long and wide, machines, not people on foot, convoy vehicles. Myra watched him from the mat. Her body was still weak, but her eyes were sharp now, following every move he made. "How many?" she asked. Calder squinted at the screen. "Hard to say, at least 3, maybe more behind them." She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "They won't stop at your fence." "That's what worries me," Calder said. He moved to the storage wall and opened a panel. Inside were old tools and parts, but also things he didn't show to visitors. A compact drone folded flat, a signal jammer, a coil of tripline charges he had built himself years ago when syndicate patrols had gotten too curious about independent ranchers. He pulled out the drone and placed it on the floor. It unfolded with soft clicks, 4 thin wings spreading like a metal insect. He keyed it to life, and the small camera feed appeared on the wall screen. "Stay here," Calder said to Myra. "I'm going to see who's out there." Myra pushed herself up on one elbow. "You can't face them alone." Calder gave her a sideways look. "I've faced worse." She studied him for a second, then shook her head slowly. "You don't know who they are?" "That makes 2 of us," Calder said. He opened the corridor door just enough to slip through and sealed it behind him. The drone floated up and followed him, its small lights dimmed. Calder stepped into the buffer corridor and then into the equipment shed. He grabbed a heavy coat with extra armor plates sewn into the lining and shrugged it on. Outside, the storm was still fierce, but the convoy lights were closer now, glowing through the white like moving moons. Calder sent the drone up into the air. It climbed fast, cutting through the snow. The camera feed shifted to an overhead view, grainy but clear enough. 3 large crawler trucks led the line, wide and low, with thick treads and heavy frames. Behind them came 2 more vehicles, taller, with mounted scanning arms that swept the ground. Their lights cut long paths through the storm. They were not simple traders. The side markings on the lead truck came into view as the drone zoomed in. Calder's jaw tightened. The symbol was a sharp, broken circle with a line through it. Syndicate. He cursed it under his breath. The territory syndicates did not move in small groups during storms unless they were hunting something or someone. Calder pulled the drone back and returned to the house, sealing the doors behind him. Myra had managed to sit up, using the wall for support. "They're syndicate," Calder said. Myra's face went still. "I thought so." Calder narrowed his eyes. "You didn't tell me that." "I didn't know for sure," she said, "but I suspected." Calder crossed the room and stopped in front of her. "You ended up on my land in a storm with syndicate hunters coming in behind you. That's not a coincidence." Myra held his gaze. "No, it's not." For a moment, Calder considered telling her to leave, to walk back into the storm and take her trouble with her. But the thought of pushing a half-frozen woman into a whiteout made something twist in his chest. Instead, he took a slow breath. "Start talking." Myra lowered her eyes, then looked back up. "I told you my name is Myra. That part is true. I didn't tell you what I do." Calder waited. "I run things," she said carefully. "Trade routes, land operations, food supply chains." Calder let out a short, humorless laugh. That's a big way of saying you're a merchant. Her lips pressed together. I'm more than that. Calder didn't push. He stepped away and began moving through the house, checking locks, sealing vents, lowering the storm shutters all the way. The metal plate slid down over the windows with a low grind, leaving only narrow slits. How far are they? Mara asked. 10 minutes, maybe less, Calder said. He activated the signal jammer and placed it near the outer wall. It wouldn't block everything, but it would make it harder for the convoy to scan the house or communicate cleanly with anything in orbit. Mara shifted, trying to stand. Her legs shook. Don't, Calder said. You'll fall. I can help, she said. You can sit and stay warm, he replied. That's helping. A deep rumble rolled through the ground, faint but growing. The convoy engines, they were close enough now that Calder could feel the vibration through the floor. The first set of lights appeared through the narrow window slit, bright and cold. The lead crawler stopped just outside the fence line. Its scanning arm lifted and began to sweep back and forth, sending pulses of blue light across the snow. Calder moved to the side of the room, out of direct view. He picked up the shock baton and held it loosely ready. A voice came through the external speaker mounted near the door. It was amplified, calm, and carried easily over the storm. Rancher on this property, the voice said. This is a syndicate inspection team. We are tracking a missing asset. Open your gate and remain where you are. Calder clenched his jaw. Mara's eyes flicked to him. Her hands tightened on the mat. Calder stepped closer to the speaker and pressed the reply button. You're off route, he said. This is private land. Turn around and wait out the storm somewhere else. There was a pause. The scanning arm continued to sweep. Your land is within syndicate trade oversight, the voice replied. We have the right to inspect during emergency conditions. Calder snorted. Funny, I don't remember signing that away. Another pause. Then the voice changed slightly, losing some of its calm. Our missing asset was last detected near this location. Failure to cooperate will be noted. Calder glanced at Mara. Her face was unreadable. He pressed the button again. I don't have anything that belongs to you. The scanning light stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then the lead crawler rolled forward, crushing part of the fence under its treads. Calder swore and moved fast. He hit a switch on the wall. Outside, the yard lights flared bright, blinding white. At the same time, a low hum filled the air as the jammer pushed its power higher. The second crawler's scanning arm twitched and sparked, its beam flickering. The speaker crackled again. Rancher, step outside now. Calder didn't answer. Myra pushed herself fully upright, leaning against the wall. They won't stop, she said quietly. They don't care about your land. Calder looked at her. Then they picked the wrong day. He moved to the floor panel near the door and lifted it. Inside was a small control pad connected to the trip lines he had buried around the yard years ago. He hadn't thought he would ever use them again. Outside, one of the convoy trucks split off and began moving around the fence line, searching for a weak point. Calder activated the first line. A sharp crack echoed through the storm as a burst of energy snapped across the snow near the moving truck. Its treads sparked, and the vehicle lurched to a stop, smoke rising from its side. The speaker came alive, this time with anger in the voice. You just escalated this. Calder pressed the button. You crossed my fence, that was your choice. Myra watched him, something like surprise in her eyes. You fight like you've done this before. Calder didn't look at her. Out here, you learn. The lead crawler's top hatch opened, and a figure rose out of it, shielded by a heavy coat and a glowing face visor. The figure raised one arm, and behind it the other vehicles shifted position. Calder's drone, which he had left hovering near the ceiling, suddenly flickered. The feed filled with static and went dark. They're jamming you back, Mara said. Calder cursed. Figures. The figure outside spoke through the speaker again. Last chance, Rancher. Hand over the woman who came through this area and we leave. Calder felt a cold knot form in his stomach. They knew. He glanced at Mara. Her face was pale, but her chin lifted slightly, a small, stubborn motion. Calder pressed the button. There's no one here but me and my animals. The figure outside stood still for a long moment. Then it lowered its arm. The ground shook as the convoy moved forward together. Calder moved to the side wall and grabbed a long metal rod from its mount. He jammed it into a floor socket and twisted. Somewhere outside, hidden under the snow, a row of old defense posts rose up, forming a rough barrier between the house and the yard. The lead crawler crashed into one of them, metal screaming against metal. Inside, Myra closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, her voice was steady. "You're risking everything for me?" Calder glanced at her. "I already did when I picked you up." The storm roared louder as if the world itself was reacting to the conflict. Snow slammed against the shutters. The air felt thick and charged. The convoy didn't stop. A smaller machine broke away from the line, fast and low, darting toward the side of the house. Calder ran. He hit the side door panel and threw it open just as the machine reached the wall. It was a compact drone on treads, its front end glowing with a cutting beam. Calder swung the shock baton. The energy field crackled and slammed into the drone, sending it spinning into a snowbank where it sparked and went still. He barely had time to step back inside before a loud thud hit the door. The walls shuddered. Mara called out, "They're testing your defenses." Calder sealed the door again and leaned against it for a second, breathing hard. His heart pounded in his ears. He moved back into the main room. The heater flickered, then steadied. "Why are they after you?" Calder asked. Mara hesitated, then she spoke, each word careful. "Because if they control me, they control something much bigger." Calder stared at her. "Like what?" She met his eyes. "The food lines, the ranch networks, the trade paths that feed half this territory." Calder felt the weight of that sink in. "You're not just a trader." "No," she said. "I'm the one who decides where the food goes." Outside, the convoy engines roared louder. The barrier posts groaned under the pressure. Calder ran a hand through his hair. "You brought a war to my door." Myra shook her head. "They brought it to both of us." The speaker crackled again, but this time the voice was closer, sharper. "We are entering your property." Calder moved to the center of the room, standing between Myra and the door without thinking about it. He tightened his grip on the baton. The walls shook as something heavy hit the outer barrier. Snow and ice slid down the shutters in sheets. Myra's voice came soft but strong. "If they get in, they won't stop with me. They'll take your land, your animals, everything." Calder didn't answer. He didn't need to. Outside, metal tore and snapped. One of the barrier posts fell. The door panel flashed red, warning of pressure on the outer seal. Calder squared his shoulders. He had lived his life keeping to his land, staying small, staying out of the syndicate's notice. He had thought that was enough to survive. Now, with a powerful stranger behind him and an army of machines at his gate, he understood something new. On Kestrel's reach, staying out of the fight didn't mean the fight would stay away from you. And as the door began to bend inward under the weight of the convoy's push, Calder Rook made a quiet decision. If this was the day his small, forgotten patch of land became a battlefield, then he would make sure it was a battlefield the syndicate would never forget. The door did not break. It bent, it screamed, it shook in its frame, but it held. Calder stood with his feet planted wide, one hand braced against the wall, the other gripping the shock baton so hard his knuckles went pale. The red warning light over the door pulsed like a heartbeat. Outside, the convoy engine roared, a deep, angry sound that filled the house and made the floor vibrate. Myra stood behind him, one hand on the wall to keep her balance. Her face was tight, focused. She was not panicking. That alone told Calder she was used to danger, used to being in the center of things that broke and burned. Then, suddenly, the pressure stopped. The engine noise lowered, backing away. Calder frowned and leaned closer to the narrow window slit. Through the snow and light, he saw the lead crawler pull back a few meters. The other machines shifted position, forming a loose half-circle around the house. They were not leaving. "They're changing tactics," Calder muttered. The speaker crackled again. The same voice, but calmer now, like a hand laid flat on a blade. "Mara Vera," it said. Calder felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. Mara went still. The voice continued. "You've been hard to find. This doesn't need to end badly. Come out and we'll make this easy for everyone." Calder turned slowly and looked at her. "They know your full name." Mara closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had shifted in her expression. The careful traveler mask was gone. What stood there now was someone who had given orders that moved thousands of people and tons of cargo across the stars. "Yes," she said quietly. "They do." Calder took a step toward her. "You want to tell me who you really are now?" Myra didn't dodge at this time. "I run the Grand Range Coalition." The words landed heavy. Calder had heard of the coalition, of course. Everyone had. They controlled massive ranch worlds, food convoys, orbital depots. They fed planets that would starve without them. Their leaders were names whispered in trade halls and feared in corporate boardrooms. "You're one of them," Calder said. "I'm the one," Myra replied. Calder let out a slow breath. You rule the biggest food network in the territory, and you ended up freezing in my field." Myra gave a small, dry smile. "Power doesn't stop the cold." Outside, the speaker came alive again. "You see, rancher, you're sheltering someone far above your station. Step aside. This isn't your fight." Calder felt anger spark in his chest. He moved back to the control panel and hit the reply button. "She's on my land," he said. "That makes it my fight." There was a pause, then a new voice came through, deeper, sharper. "Brave words, but you don't understand what she is worth." Calder glanced at Mara. She met his eyes. There was no fear there, just a steady, hard truth. "They don't want me alive," she said. "They want me under their control. If they break me, they break the coalition. They decide who eats and who doesn't." Calder clenched his jaw. He had seen what happened when trade routes failed. Outposts went silent. Settlements vanished. Hunger didn't care about politics. The convoy engines revved again. Calder moved fast. He ran to the back wall and opened another hidden panel. Inside was a small broadcast unit, dusty and old. He had built it years ago, back when independent ranchers still talked to each other instead of hiding behind fences. He powered it on. The screen flickered, then stabilized into a wideband transmission mode. Mara watched him. "What are you doing?" "Making noise," Calder said. "Big noise." He tuned the unit to the open range channel, a frequency used by farmers, pilots, and traders who didn't trust corporate lines. It was messy, full of static and half-working signals, but it reached far. He pressed the transmit key. "This is Calder Rook," he said, his voice steady but loud. "Independent rancher on Kestrel's Reach, Northwest Range. Syndicate convoy on my land. They're hunting someone and breaking fences to get her. If anyone can hear this, I could use eyes in the sky." He released the key and waited. Mara stared at him. "You just told half the planes where you are," Calder shrugged. "Better than letting them think they can do this in the dark." Outside, the convoy shifted. One of the taller machines raised a dish-like antenna, pointing it toward the sky. "They're trying to block you," Mara said. "Let them try," Calder replied. The first reply came through the broadcast unit in a burst of static and a familiar voice. "Rook. This is hail from the south fields. I see the storm flare in orbit. What did you say about syndicate trucks?" Calder grabbed the mic. "They're on my land, hail, 5 machines, maybe more, breaking my fence and pushing my house." There was a pause, then a low whistle through the channel. "That's not right. I'll spread the word." Another voice cut in, this one higher, excited. "This is Jessa, Skyhauler 7. I'm above the storm layer. I see heat signatures near your location." "That convoy is lit up like a bonfire." Calder felt a small surge of relief. "Can you get eyes on them?" "Already got them," Jessa replied. "Syndicate markings, no doubt. They're not broadcasting inspection codes." Myra stepped closer to the unit. "Tell them to record everything," she said. "Every move they make." Calder nodded and relayed the message. Outside, the convoy leader seemed to realize something had changed. The scanning lights swung toward the sky instead of the house. The speaker crackled again. "Rancher, shut down your transmitter. You're interfering with an authorized operation." Calder smiled without humor. "Funny, it didn't sound authorized to me." A sharp, loud crack echoed as one of the convoy machines fired a signal flare into the air. It burst above the house in a red glow, painting the snow and the walls in blood-colored light. Myra flinched despite herself. "They're calling in more," she said. Calder's jaw tightened. "Then we don't have much time." The broadcast unit buzzed again. Hale's voice came through. "Word is spreading. Folks are watching. Syndicate doesn't like eyes on them." Jessa's voice followed. "I've got my cargo cams pointed their way, streaming to open net." Calder felt a strange mix of fear and pride. His small, quiet life had just been thrown onto a public stage. The convoy engines roared. 2 of the crawler trucks split off, moving wide around the yard, trying to find another angle. Calder ran to the control panel and activated another line. The ground near the left side of the yard erupted in a burst of blue energy, and one of the machines skidded, slamming into a snowbank. The other kept going. Mara grabbed Calder's arm. "They'll breach you eventually. You can't hold them forever." Calder looked at her. "Then what do you suggest?" She took a breath. "I call my people." Calder hesitated. "You said your escort betrayed you." "Yes," Myra said, "but not all of them, and not my whole network." She stepped to the broadcast unit and adjusted the frequency, her fingers moving with practiced speed. She spoke into the mic, her voice changing, becoming firm, clear, and carrying weight. "This is Mara Vera," she said. "Crown of the Grand Range Coalition. I am alive." I am under syndicate assault on Kestrel's Reach Independent Ranch sector. If you hear this, the open range protocol is in effect. There was silence for a heartbeat. Then the channel exploded with noise. Voices poured in, overlapping, urgent. Mara. This is Outpost Delta, we hear you. Trade ship Ardent here, we're rerouting. Ranch Block 12 standing by. Mara's eyes shone, not with tears but with fire. She turned to Calder. They can't hide now, not from me, not from everyone. Outside, the convoy speaker crackled again, and this time the voice was strained. Stand down. This is escalating beyond your control. Calder stepped forward and pressed the button. That's what you said when you crossed my fence. The sky flashed again with pale lightning. The storm howled louder than before, like it was angry at all of them. The first sign of help came as a distant rumble from above, different from the convoy engines. A deep, smooth sound, like the air itself was being pushed aside. Jessa's voice came through, excited. I've got ships dropping through the cloud layer, not syndicate, coalition colors. Mara closed her eyes for a second, relief washing over her face. Calder ran to the window slit. Through the storm, he saw shapes in the sky, dark against the white, moving fast. Small cargo craft and patrol flyers, their lights cutting clean lines through the snow. The convoy reacted at once. The crawler trucks turned, scanning upward, their antennas swinging. The speaker blared. All units, defensive posture. Calder felt the ground shake as the machines repositioned. Mara moved beside him, steadying herself. They can't fight in the air and on the ground at the same time. They came for a quiet grab, not a battle. Calder nodded. Looks like they picked the wrong day. A bright beam of light stabbed down from the sky, illuminating the lead crawler. A voice boomed from above, amplified and clear. This is Coalition Patrol Wing, it said. Syndicate convoy, you are operating outside your charter. Power down and withdraw. The convoy did not comply. Instead, one of the taller machines fired a burst of energy upward. It missed, cutting a glowing line through the storm clouds. Calder's heart pounded. They're actually shooting, Myra's jaw set. They're desperate. The patrol flyers moved fast. They circled, their engines roaring. One of them released a pulse that slammed into the side of a crawler, knocking it sideways. The snow exploded into the air. The yard lights flickered as the power grid strained. Inside, Calder grabbed a support bar as the house shook. The convoy began to pull back, slowly at first, then faster as another crawler took a hit and went dark. The speaker crackled, the voice now tight with anger. This isn't over, Mara Vera. Myra stepped closer to the door and spoke without the mic, her voice carrying anyway. No, she said, it's not, but you don't get to decide how it ends. The last of the convoy turned and drove back into the storm, their lights fading like dying stars. Silence followed, broken only by the wind and the low hum of the heater. Calder leaned against the wall, suddenly feeling how tired he was. His hands shook not from cold, but from the release of tension. Myra sank back down onto the mat, breathing hard. The broadcast unit buzzed again. Hale's voice came through, amazed. Rook, you still standing? Calder grabbed the mic. Yeah, still standing. Jessa laughed over the channel. That was something to watch. You just made the open net, friend. Calder shut off the unit and let the room fall quiet. He turned to Myra. Looks like you brought half the sky with you. Myra gave a small, tired smile. Looks like you brought the planes. They sat there for a moment, listening to the storm begin to ease, the wind losing some of its bite. Calder looked at her, really looked this time, not as a stranger in trouble, not as a powerful leader, but as a person who had been hunted and had fought back. You're going to have bigger problems now, he said. Myra nodded. So are you. Calder chuckled softly. Guess my quiet life is over. Myra's eyes softened. You could have walked away, Calder shrugged. Someone once told me power doesn't stop the cold. I think that works both ways. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to lighten the storm clouds, turning the white world a soft gray. The blizzard was not gone. The danger was not gone. But for the first time since Calder Rook had heard that weak emergency beacon, the land felt like it was breathing again instead of holding its breath. And somewhere across the territory, people were already telling a new story. About a rancher who stood his ground. The storm had eased, leaving the plains coated in sharp white frost that reflected the pale dawn. Calder Rook stood outside, the snow crunching under his boots, and stared at the remnants of the convoy's tracks. The ground was scarred, churned, a battlefield that had appeared overnight. The air smelled of metal and ozone from the pulses fired by the syndicate machines. Mara was behind him, stepping carefully. Her suit, now patched with Calder's makeshift repairs, clung to her form, but she moved with the authority of someone who commanded worlds, not just land. Her eyes scanned the horizon, calculating, sharp, aware. "They won't come back without backup," Calder said. He rubbed his hands together, trying to warm them. "They learned something today." "They'll regroup," Mara said. "They always do." "I know," he admitted. "But not for long. People out there saw what happened. You broadcast it. Now it's public." Mara nodded. "And that matters." The coalition doesn't forgive silence. Any syndicate trying to control this territory now faces every independent ranch, every trader, every skyhauler who owes loyalty to no one but food and survival. Calder turned to look at her, really look at her. In the dim light of dawn, he could see more than the armor and patched suit. He saw strength born of responsibility and years of hard decisions. She wasn't a ruler in the way people imagined power. She was a leader because she survived when others failed, because she made hard choices that preserved lives and resources. "They'll come back," Calder said again, voice low, "with more than just machines this time." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Then we make sure they don't get the chance." Inside the house, Calder began checking his equipment. He had the old drone, the tripline charges, and the small supply of improvised weapons he'd kept in reserve. Nothing compared to syndicate firepower or coalition-level tech, but out here, ingenuity often beat brute force. Myra watched him move with quiet admiration. "You're not just a simple rancher," she said. "I can see that now." Calder gave a small shrug. "I survive." "That's all anyone out here really needs to do," she smiled faintly. "Survival built empires, Calder." The first convoy hadn't been their only problem. Out beyond the ridge, the terrain stretched open, dotted with smaller outposts, each vulnerable to syndicate control. Mara pulled a small tablet from her coat and activated it. Maps of the territory flickered across the screen, showing supply lines, convoy routes, and local settlements. A network of independent ranchers and small traders pulsed with markers, each connected in a delicate chain. "They trust me to feed them," she said quietly. "If I fail, they starve. If the syndicates win, the same thing happens, but for profit, not survival." Calder nodded. He understood that instinctively. He had seen the effects of failed trade before. Isolated homesteads, animals left to die, families struggling against the cold with nothing to eat. Out here, food was power. Survival was authority. Outside, the first of the coalition's patrol flyers began to circle the area, small silhouettes against the rising sun. The hum of their engines was a reassurance. Myra activated a long-range comm, connecting to the coalition network. Her voice carried across the frequency, firm and commanding. "Rook's property is secure. Syndicate forces are contained. Send reinforcement units to the outer sectors immediately. We will not let the food lines fail." Calder listened, impressed. He had lived all his life relying on his own skills, trusting only his hands, his instincts, and his animals. Mara's words had the power to move fleets, change priorities, and bend the actions of people he had never met. "They believe in you," Calder said. Mara shook her head slightly. "They believe in what I protect, and now they've seen someone else willing to fight for it too." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of frost and the faint metallic tang from the burned machines. Calder's herd was still in the barn, safe for now. But he knew he couldn't rely on isolation anymore. The plains were no longer quiet. They had become a stage, a proving ground. "We should check the outer fence lines," Calder said. "Make sure nothing's left that could cause trouble if it snows again." Mara followed him, moving with surprising speed given the storm fatigue. The two of them reached the edge of the property. Broken posts and deep treads scarred the snow, evidence of the convoy's attempts to breach the land. Calder examined each post, assessing which needed reinforcement. Mara crouched beside him, studying the patterns of movement left behind. "They learned your defenses fast," she said. "You'll need to upgrade, they'll come back." Calder nodded. "I know." He pressed a small panel on one of the posts, and hidden energy lines lit up faintly under the snow, small, controlled pulses that could deter vehicles if necessary. "I have a few tricks left." Myra's eyes softened slightly. "You're full of surprises, I like that." Before Calder could respond, the distant hum of engines reached their ears again. Not syndicate this time, but a convoy of independent ranchers, traders, and small cargo ships responding to Myra's broadcast. The open plains were alive with movement now, and the snow seemed to sparkle under the mechanical glow of lights and engines. Calder felt something he hadn't in years: hope. A small, cautious hope, but real. Humans, he realized, had a stubbornness built into their bones. They would not give up land, food, or freedom easily, and when united under a cause, that stubbornness could become unstoppable. Mara activated her tablet again, sending instructions through the network. Supplies were rerouted, patrols coordinated, and defensive positions planned along the territory. Calder watched, fascinated, as a web of communication spread like wildfire, each independent unit reacting quickly, efficiently, purposefully. "They've turned your quiet plains into a stronghold," he said. Myra smiled faintly. "They've always been strong, they just needed someone to remind them." Calder looked at her. "And that's you?" She nodded. "I've been hiding it too long. Today, you reminded me that being powerful isn't enough if people don't see the value of what you protect." A sudden flare of light caught their attention. One of the syndicate's stragglers had returned, a small scout crawler moving cautiously through the storm-swept fields. Calder's hand went instinctively to the shock baton, but Myra raised a hand. "Let me," she said. Her fingers moved across the tablet, and the drone above responded, locking onto the scout. Within seconds, the crawler skidded, caught by an energy pulse Calder hadn't seen her trigger. Sparks flew as it spun out of control and buried itself in the snow. Calder's jaw dropped. "You did that?" Myra didn't look at him. "We protect what matters." "That's the rule even out here." The morning continued in a tense rhythm. Coalition units arrived from all directions, reinforcing the rancher's stronghold. Independent operators set up observation posts, establishing lines of sight and early warning systems. Calder worked alongside them, repairing fences, positioning traps, and guiding Myra's instructions across the property. By midday, the snow had softened into a steady drizzle, the storm broken but still alive in the distance. Calder stepped back and observed. His property, his land, had become a fortress, a symbol, and a rallying point. And he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to before. He was no longer alone in this fight. Myra turned to him, her expression serious. "This is just the beginning. The syndicates will not accept defeat lightly. They will try again, and next time they may bring fleets instead of ground machines." Calder nodded. "Then we'll be ready. We've got people watching, we've got tricks they won't expect, and we've got something they underestimate." "And what's that?" Myra asked. Calder smiled, a small, confident grin. "Humans, stubborn humans who fight for what's theirs even when it seems impossible." Myra allowed herself a faint smile. "I like that answer." The sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the snow. Calder felt the warmth on his face and the cold in his bones, and he realized that he had survived storms before, but this one was different. It wasn't just a battle against weather. It was a battle for the land, for survival, for humanity itself. He looked out across the plains and saw movement. Small figures on the horizon, independent ranchers, pilots, traders, all responding to the call Myra had sent. The vast expanse of white was dotted now with colors and life. The coalition's network was in motion, and Calder understood that he had become part of something larger than his isolated homestead. Myra's voice cut through his thoughts. "We need to prepare the outer sectors. Syndicate forces may try to attack in waves. We have to be ready." Calder turned to her, ready to argue, ready to say that he was just a simple rancher, but he stopped. He saw the truth in her eyes, the certainty that came from years of commanding people, animals, and resources. She was right. They had to prepare. Together, they began to move through the property, coordinating with incoming support, setting up defenses, and sharing knowledge. Calder taught them the tricks of the land, the hidden dips, the snow-covered traps, the shortcuts through frozen streams. Myra taught them strategy, logistics, and the importance of every life in the network. By evening, the sun had set, painting the snow in pale gold and purple hues. The first night after the storm was quiet but alive with anticipation. Calder and Myra stood on the highest ridge, looking down at the transformed property. Lights from coalition units twinkled across the plains, fences reinforced, patrols in position. "This is more than I imagined," Calder said. Myra nodded. "This is what happens when people work together, when they remember why they fight." Calder looked at her, and for the first time he realized that he had not only found a powerful ally but also someone who understood the land, the people, and the stubbornness it took to survive out here. The storm was gone, but the battle was just beginning. And together they would face it, not as isolated individuals, but as a united front. A rancher who refused to give up his land and a ruler who refused to let her people starve. The plains stretched before them, endless and white, but for the first time, Calder felt that they were not empty. They were full of possibility, of resistance, and of the quiet, powerful force of humans who refused to be controlled. And as the wind whispered through the ridge, Calder knew that the fight for the territory, for freedom, and for survival was only beginning. They had held the day. They would hold the night. And when the syndicates came again, they would find that humans on Kestrel's Reach were no longer alone, no longer afraid, and no longer easy to underestimate. Calder glanced at Mara. "We're ready for whatever comes next." She nodded, her eyes fierce and unyielding. "They'll learn soon enough. Humanity doesn't bend that easily." Together, they turned back toward the house, toward the heart of their stronghold, and toward the rising challenge that awaited them. The plains had tested them, but they had proven something vital. That even in a frozen, dangerous world, unity, courage, and stubborn humanity could withstand any storm. And as the night deepened, lights from distant hills flickered in acknowledgement, the first of many allies responding to the call, heralding a new era for the independent ranchers and the coalition alike. The battle was far from over. But Calder and Mara, side by side, understood one thing clearly. The plains were theirs to protect, and no one, not syndicates, not storms, not fear, would take that away without a fight. The first light of dawn stretched across the frozen plains, painting everything in pale gold. Calder Rook stood at the edge of his property, boots sinking slightly in the snow, and felt the wind lift gently against his face. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world cleaned by ice, scarred by tracks, and still tense with the memory of yesterday's battle. But now there was a different kind of quiet. A waiting quiet, the kind that made every sound of movement sharper, every shadow alive with possibility. Mara Vera moved beside him, her repaired suit catching the morning light. She didn't need the warmth of a room, her confidence radiated through her, steady and unshakable. Calder had seen her strength yesterday, but now, in the calm, he understood it was more than that. It was authority. It was responsibility. It was humanity sharpened by experience and tempered by the lives she carried on her shoulders. "They'll try again," Calder said, voice low but firm. Mara nodded. "They always do. The syndicates don't give up easily, but now the independent networks are awake. They've seen what happens when someone stands against the syndicate. They will fight with us." Calder let his eyes sweep over the horizon. Already, distant lights moved toward his homestead, small fleets of patrols, independent ranchers riding high-tech snow beasts, traders in armored crawlers, and even skyhauler crafts gliding low over the plains. Mara's broadcast had been heard everywhere, and people had answered. For the first time in decades, Kestrel's Reach felt alive, connected, and defiant. "They're counting on you," Calder said quietly. Mara turned to him, her eyes steady and calm. "No, they're counting on all of us. You proved that yesterday. You held your ground. You made a small place into a stronghold. That's proof anyone can stand." Calder swallowed, feeling both pride and a humbling weight. He had always thought of himself as just a rancher, a man who survived on a forgotten stretch of land. Now he realized that even a single human, willing to fight for what is right, could become a spark that started a fire across the plains. The rumble came from the east first, low, steady, and growing. It was not the syndicate. It was the independent ranchers who had answered the call, moving in lines, herds packed behind armored sleds, sending warnings to one another and coordinating movement as if they were born to act as a unit. Calder had never seen the like in his lifetime. People who had lived isolated for years were now connected, moving as one, and they carried the weight of survival with pride. "They've rallied," Calder said, a faint grin on his lips. Mara's eyes glimmered with the same pride mixed with calculation. "Yes. But the syndicate will not stop with this setback. They will bring more machines, more firepower, maybe fleets. We need to make sure they cannot take the territory by force." Calder ran a hand over the reinforced fence. Each post, each trip line, and each hidden pulse line was ready. His herds were safe in the barn. The geothermal heat ran steadily. The homestead had become more than shelter. It was now a fortress, a rallying point, and a symbol. The first syndicate scout appeared over the ridge. A single crawler moved cautiously, scanning the area. Calder activated one of his older defense lines, simple, reliable. Sparks flew as the pulse caught the vehicle, spinning it into a shallow snowbank. Myra had her tablet out, coordinating with the coalition network. Within minutes, patrol crafts and independent fighters had locked onto the remaining machines. "They'll learn fast," Myra said, her tone calm but her eyes sharp. "They can't hide in the open anymore." Calder stood beside her, watching the horizon. "You're changing everything out here, not just my land, but the whole territory." Myra's expression softened slightly. "I'm just giving them a reason to stand together. People out here need hope as much as they need food." "You've given them both." He felt the weight of that, realizing that a life spent alone on the plains had been about more than survival. It had been about understanding the land, knowing every inch of snow, every dip in the frozen streams, every hidden path through the hills. Knowledge that now became a tool in a battle far larger than his property line. The main syndicate convoy appeared on the horizon. Larger this time, a full force, with multiple crawlers, armed vehicles, and scanning machines. Their engines shook the earth and the snow lifted in clouds before them. Calder's pulse quickened, but he didn't step back. Myra's presence steadied him. "They think we're small," she said, almost to herself. "They think we'll scatter, they think we'll give up our land." Calder's eyes narrowed. "They're about to learn they're wrong." Myra raised her hand, fingers moving over the tablet. Lines of communication connected independent units scattered across the territory. Lights from distant ridges blinked in response. Cavalry of snow beasts, sleds with mounted energy pulses, and small flying patrols all converged toward the approaching syndicate forces. Calder moved quickly, setting his own defenses. Tripline pulses ready, drones in the air for reconnaissance, traps set near weak spots. Myra watched him, impressed by his knowledge of the land. "You've taught them well," she said. Calder shook his head. "I'm just using what I've always known. The land doesn't lie. You read it wrong, you die." Myra smiled faintly. "And now others will read it right because of you." The syndicate forces slowed as they approached the reinforced lines. Their scanners picked up pulses and drones, forcing them to shift formation. One of their crawlers tried to advance too quickly, caught in a pulse trap, sparks flying as it ground to a halt. Calder leaned against a fence post, hands steady on his baton. Myra coordinated the network, directing units with precision. Outposts opened fire in controlled bursts, herders guided their beasts strategically, and the combined force created a web that made the syndicate's advance impossible. "They won't break us today," Calder said, feeling the surge of determination in the air. Myra nodded. "No. But they'll learn humanity is not easy to control, and Kestrel's reach is ours to protect." The main convoy leader stepped out of a crawler hatch, his visor glowing in the sunlight. Calder and Myra watched him through the reinforced window. Mara's voice carried across the open channels, commanding attention. "Leave this territory," she said firmly, "or face every independent rancher, every fleet, and every human willing to defend what is theirs. We will not yield." For a moment, there was silence. Then the engines revved, the syndicate machines backing slowly. They had miscalculated. They had underestimated the determination of people defending their homes and the authority of a leader who refused to be captured. The retreat began. Machines skidded, crawlers turned, and the convoy pulled back into the distant hills. The sky became quieter, but the message was clear. They would not win here. Calder stepped outside, snow crunching under his boots, and let the wind sweep over him. Myra joined him, and together they looked across the property. It had been a long fight, but they had held the day. "They'll try again," Myra said softly, though there was satisfaction in her voice. "Then we'll be ready," Calder replied. "The land is ours, the people are awake, and we're not going anywhere." Myra turned to him, her eyes reflecting the rising sun. "You could have walked away yesterday. You didn't. You saved me when no one else would. That matters more than you know." Calder shrugged. "Someone has to stand, someone has to fight," she smiled faintly. "And that's what makes humans dangerous. We fight when it seems impossible, we endure when we have nothing, and we rise when others think we've fallen." The distant hills flickered with lights as independent allies returned to their positions, reporting status and readying for the future. Calder realized that the storm had not just tested them, it had transformed them. Small, disconnected ranches and traders were now a network, a movement, a force the syndicates could not ignore. The wind carried the sound of distant engines and voices, and Calder could feel it deep in his chest. Unity, determination, and a stubborn refusal to be broken. Humanity had rallied on these frozen plains, and the spark had been lit by one man and one woman who refused to back down. Mara looked out across the horizon. This is only the beginning, but today we proved something important. We can protect what matters. Calder nodded. And we will, whatever comes next, we'll face it together. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the snow. The plains stretched endlessly, white and bright, but alive now with movement, with purpose, with people who understood that survival was more than endurance. It was courage, strategy, and the will to stand. Calder and Mara walked back toward the homestead, side by side, ready to face the challenges ahead. The storm had passed, but the fight for the land, the people, and the freedom to survive had just begun. Every ridge, every hill, and every frozen path held allies now. The syndicate would return, yes, but they would return to a land united, watched by eyes that refused to close, and protected by humans who had proven one simple truth: that courage, unity, and stubbornness could overcome any machine, any force, any storm. Calder felt the snow crunch underfoot and let the warmth of purpose settle in his chest. Myra's presence beside him reminded him that humans could be powerful, not because of tech or firepower, but because of vision and will. Together they looked across Kestrel's reach, a horizon full of challenge, promise, and the unshakable heartbeat of humanity ready to defend what was theirs. And in that quiet dawn, Calder Rook knew. The battle was far from over, but humanity would rise again and again. Because no storm, no syndicate, and no force in the territory could ever break those who refused to yield.